Hello everyone, this is Trace and welcome back to Straight Talk. Today, let's talk about Tibet. This year marks the 70th anniversary of the peaceful liberation of Tibet. Before its peaceful liberation, Old Tibet was a society of feudal theocratic serfdom. Serf owners made up only 5% of the total population. The other 95% of people were serfs, or you can just directly call them slaves. 70 years ago, 14th Dalai Lama was the supreme leader of Tibet and the de facto ruler of Lhasa. With such strong political and religious influence, Dalai became the richest and the most potent serf owner. The 14th Dalai Lama and his family directly controlled 27 manors, 36 pastures, 6,170 filed serfs, and 102 house slaves. The Dalai Lama owned 160,000 taels of gold, 95 million taels of silver. Even more unimaginable, the rosary he used was made from 108 different human skulls. Alexandra David-Néel, a French scholar who had been to Old Tibet several times, wrote in her books, Dalai and the other slave owners lived in luxurious palaces, possessed huge fortune and hundreds of slaves, while all the peasants were indebted for life and had no personal freedom. All this changed after the liberation, as democratic reforms were launched in Tibet. All the serfs were liberated and given their own land. Dalai's brutal rule finally came to an end. However, the US tries to contain the spread of communism around the world. And the CIA started a 2-decade-long anti-China covert operation designed to train Tibetan insurgents. According to a book written by Kenneth Conboy, CIA's Secret War in Tibet, in 1959, the CIA agents helped the 14th Dalai fled to India. But that's not all. As early as the 1950s, the US began to secretly support the secessionist guerrilla movement in Tibet, in line with its National Security Council 5412 program, which is part of a grand plan to contain China. Between the 1950s and 1960s, the US government flew hundreds of Tibetan separatists to far-flung bases in Japan, Guam, and even Colorado. Thingley Tenzing was one of them. In 1959, some Americans found him in India and asked if he wanted to kill the Chinese. After giving an affirmative answer, Tenzing was sent to a top-secret US military base in Colorado, where he learnt modern weapons and guerrilla tactics. Then he returned to Tibet on a US Air Force plane. CIA also airdropped a large number of weapons, food, and medicine to these rebel forces. With the strong support of the US, they made frequent raids into Tibet, attacking PLA convoys and camps. According to the released US intelligence documents, the CIA provided the Tibetan separatists with $1.7 million a year for the operations against China, including an annual subsidy of $180,000 for Dalai. In addition to military patronage, the US has continued to give political support to Tibetan separatists. In 1987, the US House of Representatives passed Bill 2476, which decided to provide financial aid and university scholarship for Tibetan separatists legally. This was the first attempt by the US Congress to intervene in Tibet, but by no means the last. In December 2020, a so-called Tibetan Policy and Support Act of 2020 was passed by the US Congress, which maliciously distorts Tibet's social development, denigrates China's ethnic and religious policies. Just on July 28th of this year, Antony Blinken, US State Secretary, held talks with a representative of 14th Dalai. It is with the full support of the US that Dalai has organized several separatist activities. On March 14, 2008, the Dalai clique planned and executed violent riots in Lhasa, causing 18 innocent deaths and nearly 400 injuries. Then the clique published a self-immolation guide on the internet. They openly encouraged the Tibetans within the Chinese border to carry out self-immolations according to the plans and procedures. And Dalai quibbled that it was their way of defying the Chinese government's cultural genocide policy. Well, I can hardly believe what a slave owner says, but facts and data can tell the real picture of Tibet. Statistically show Tibet's GDP increases almost 1,500 times over the past 70 years. The population of Tibet has increased from 1.23 million in 1955 to nearly 3.65 million in 2020, with ethnic Tibetan people accounting for 86% of the total. There are 1,787 sites for the practice of Tibetan Buddhism and more than 46,000 resident monks and nuns in Tibet. Now Tibet has ended absolute poverty. All the 628,000 registered poor and 74 designated poor counties in Tibet had risen from poverty. The per capita living space of residents in 2020 reached about 40 square meters, while more than 90% of Tibetan residents didn't have private housing before 1951. Moreover, the average life expectancy in Tibet has increased to 71.1 years in 2020, twice before the peaceful liberation. The peaceful liberation of Tibet has set the region on a new journey. The world has witnessed the development of Tibet for the past 7 decades, increase in income, wealth, and well-being. Since ancient times, Tibet has been an integral part of China, and the Tibetan ethnic group has been a communal member of the Chinese nation, sharing a common destiny. Under the strategic plan of rural revitalization, Tibet will embrace thriving businesses, an eco-friendly environment, social etiquette and civility, and of course, a brighter future. All right, that's all for today, and see you next time.